On today's show, all the latest around the Atlanta Hawks, including Bruno Fernando's contract being guaranteed, Pascal Siakam buzz continuing, and the in-season tournament has been announced by the NBA. We'll break it down a little bit of detail on this podcast. All that and more on the way.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1519 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Rowland, coming to you on a Tuesday here midday. A shorter episode on the way today. And I do encourage you, though, to subscribe to the podcast. Make sure first listen each and every day. Check us out anywhere you get your podcasts, places like Apple and Spotify, YouTube, etc. And we'll dive right in with a laundry list of things to take care of on today's podcast. But if you've missed anything in the recent past with regard to Summer League, I am on the ground in Las Vegas still. The NBA draft coverage, free agency, trade stuff. We've been very busy on this feed over the last couple of weeks, so I definitely encourage you to check out all those previous podcasts and subscribe today. First, though, we'll dive into the actual bit of news for the Hawks between yesterday and the podcast I did after the game on Sunday to today. And that is that Bruno Fernando has his contract guaranteed for the 23-24 season. About $2.58 million is guaranteed, became so on Monday. Originally, it was scheduled for a deadline of non-guaranteed or guaranteed in late June. The two sides mutually pushed that back to July 10th. That usually is not great for the player, always, not always. I'm going to make sure that I said that out loud on that podcast in which I broke that all down a few days ago. But this is a very, very favorable deal for the Hawks overall. Even if you just think Bruno Fernando is a run-of-the-mill third center, it's a very team-friendly deal because, number one, it's cheap for this year. $2.58 million is just barely more than the minimum. Then he has a non-guaranteed contract again next year in 24-25 with a June 29 guarantee date at about $2.7 million. That's, again, very, very cheap. Then another non-guaranteed year at 25-26 with a team option on top of that. So basically, Bruno has 3 years left, only one guaranteed, and there's a team option, and it's like very flexible for the Hawks side. So I've said before I would have kept him. It would have been a pretty easy decision for me. Honestly, I think Bruno's a pretty decent third center, actually a pretty good third center, even like a reasonable backup center on a lot of different teams. So that's kind of where I am at this point in time. And with this move, the Hawks are now a little bit over 153 when it comes to $1 million over, not over, but that's the total salary committed to 14 players on guaranteed contracts. The luxury tax is about 165 at this point. So between $11 million and $12 million, they can kind of add if they want to right now, without going over the luxury tax, which I think is probably where they want to be at this point in time. Roster-wise, that does still leave a couple of non-guaranteed contract decisions. That's V. Krejci and Tyrese Martin. As I said on the last podcast, if anybody missed it, Tyrese Martin's guarantee date is actually July 21st. So we're talking about 10 days from now. That's the next decision the Hawks have to make on a roster guy. Tyrese versus V's not until January. So that might be a little bit of a interesting dilemma between the two sides. But circle that date, July 21st for Tyrese Martin. But in the meantime, those guys are only non-guaranteed. Everybody else is now guaranteed or on a two-way, which of course is Seth Lundy and Miles Norris. So the roster itself is taking shape if they don't change it, which we'll come back to in a second. Basketball stuff, again, I believe Bruno Fernando is a quality third center. It is, I think, reasonable to want a little bit more than Bruno as your number two guy on a hopeful contending team if you are the Hawks. But he could do that role in a pinch for sure. He started some games for the Rockets last year before the trade to Atlanta. As a third guy, again, he's very, very much qualified for the role. He has good ball skills, improving as a defensive anchor as well. So I think that this is a pretty easy decision for me. I think the Hawks probably labored over it a little bit more than I would have. But in the end, Bruno is going to be under contract. He can still be traded. There's no restriction there whatsoever. So it's not like he's going to be on the team. But at this point in time, Bruno is going to be getting paid, which is obviously a great day. If you're Bruno Fernando, circle July 10th for that $2.58 million being guaranteed, and that means it's a pretty good day for Bruno Fernando. I got a mailbag question on this topic, so I'm going to actually answer it right now from Kevin on Twitter, who says, does guaranteeing Bruno have any implications for if we're trading Capella or keeping Capella? I saw a lot of this kind of thing on Monday. And I think in general, people are reading way too much into the Bruno decision with regard to Capella in particular. The main reason I say that is that for the vast majority of teams, including the Hawks, basically every time I've ever covered the Hawks, they've had at least 3 centers. A lot of time they've had 4 centers. Basically, every team goes into the season with more than 2 centers. I've been saying this for a while now, but the Hawks have, in my mind, a top 5 or 6 situation at center in the entire league when you talk about the the full 48 minutes between Capella and Okongwu. Neither one of those guys right now are top 5 centers, but Capella, I believe, is a firmly above average starting center. Okongwu is the best backup in the league and probably will be a good starting center down the line. So they have 2 of these guys. At the same time, though, you're never going to have both of them play 82 games. So along the way, you're going to need a third center. And even more so now after they moved John Collins, who could have been some third center stuff for the Hawks, they don't really have that guy on the roster anymore. I guess maybe Jalen Johnson can kind of fake it in that role, but they're not really trying to develop him to do that at this point in time. Mohamed Gay is not ready for that either, and he's obviously going to be a rookie. So they don't really have a third center other than Bruno. So having Bruno at $2.5 million is a great way to fill that role for cheap and a guy who's reliable. And by the way, everyone loves Bruno, which is not a huge thing, but certainly matters on some level. So going back to the question itself, is it possible that Capella could be on the move still? Absolutely. He could be traded. That would not surprise me really in the slightest. But they would need even more at center if that were to happen. So having Bruno definitely makes sense. But a lot of the reactions that I saw to this on Twitter were almost assuming there was like an announcement that they were going to trade Capella or that they would not have guaranteed Bruno with Capella on the team. And that's not the case. I think even with Capella, this is a pretty easy decision. Without him, it's obviously even easier. But I do think that like Bruno might have had a sigh of relief when they move on from Usman Garuba. That was like probably the legitimate competition for him for the third center spot. But they need 3 centers. I can't be more clear about that. They have to have 3 centers. It would be pretty weird, actually, if they went into the season with only 2 centers because of the lack of flexibility. Like, they don't really, like, again, they're back at power forward right now. Jalen could probably do it in a pinch, but they're not trying to have him do that. So, flexibility-wise, you want to have 3 centers, especially when you have 18 roster spots, when you include the 2-way. So, I guess maybe in theory they could sign a 2-way center to have that as the third guy, but they have to have someone in the organization that's the third center, and Bruno is a good option for that. Okay. Without any more delay, we'll get into our first break of the podcast. But after that, we'll talk about Pascal Siakam as well as the in-season tournament later on in the show. But first, a word from our sponsors on the podcast. Today's show is brought to you by Ibotta. Are you finally taking that summer vacation that you've been planning and also dreading, though, everything that you actually have to buy before you take off? It is time to stop spending your hard-earned money without getting anything back in return, and that means Ibotta. Ibotta gives you cash back on hundreds of grocery items, from produce to personal care to pantry goods, to make sure you're beating inflation no matter what you are purchasing. You link your loyalty account or upload your receipt after you shop and get your cash back. It's that easy with Ibotta. The average user has $120 per year put back in their pocket. That covers the entire cost of a shopping trip or maybe part of your flight that you've been trying to get in the summer months, the game you're trying to go to, the fancy dinner you've been craving, etc. There are options there with Ibotta. And other apps might give you points that don't actually amount to much. With Ibotta, you actually get real cash back to go to your bank account, to PayPal, or to gift cards. You can earn cash back on hundreds of online brands and retailers as well. When you start using Ibotta, that includes places like Lowe's, Macy's, Sephora, Best Buy, and much more. And right now, Ibotta is offering our listeners $5 just by trying the service by using the promo code LOCKED when you register. So go to the App Store or Google Play Store right now, download the free Ibotta app, and use the promo code LOCKED. That is IBOTTA, Google Play or App Store, and use the promo code LOCKED when you get there. All right, and over the weekend, there was a big announcement out in Las Vegas about the future of the NBA. Not necessarily a Hawks topic, but certainly involves the Hawks. There was already an in-season tournament coming this year. It was already being announced, but the official details were released, again, in Las Vegas on Saturday. They'll be battling for the NBA Cup trophy. This all starts on Friday, November 3rd in team markets. It actually ends with the semifinals and finals in Vegas, December 7th and December 9th. Basically, there is group play first and then a knockout round. Group play has the league chopped up into groups of 5. The Hawks group is the Hawks, Sixers, Cavs, Pacers, and Pistons. So they're still within the conferences, but the Hawks are playing against teams outside their division, actually. It's the Sixers, and then there's 3 teams from the Central, and the Cavs, Pacers, and the Pistons. Each team will play once against each opponent in this group play, 2 at home, 2 on the road, on the tournament nights in November, which they basically have designated as Tuesday and Friday in the month of November. Then, by the way, just for clarity's sake, it'll be Philly at home, Indiana at home, and then Cleveland and Detroit on the road for the Hawks. Then the top 8 teams in the league will advance to the knockout round. The best team in all 6 groups will get the nod there, plus 2 wildcard teams on some formula I'm sure that they will release at some point in time. Then there will be single elimination quarterfinal markets. It's sort of in the team market if you have home court advantage in that round. And then the last 2 rounds, again, in Las Vegas. All the games in the in-season tournament do count, though, toward the 82-game standings, except the championship game. So if only 2 teams make that, so 28 of the 30 teams have nothing added to their schedule. If you make the finals, that's 1 extra game. And I'm sure people wouldn't mind that because there's actually incentives to winning this tournament and actually reaching the final in its own self. But still, the length of the schedule is not really affected by this, which is, I think, is a positive in a lot of ways. Every player on the winning team at the end wins $500,000. That's not a lot of money for LeBron or Trae Young, but it is a lot of money for the guys at the bottom of the league, making $1.5 million a year, $2 million a year. For instance, Bruno Fernando, a guy like Tyrese Martin or Vit Krejci or Mohamed Gay. That would be a lot of money to those guys. As far as that's like a third or fourth of their salary for the year. That'd be a nice little bump. You're also making $50K for making the knockout round in the first place, $100K for making the semifinals, $200,000 for making the championship game, even if you happen to lose in that round. So overall, we'll see how this goes. I'm not a total skeptic, but it'll be interested to see what the interest level is, how much teams buy in, how much players buy in for the first year. Do you have emphasis on these games? Because they are regular season games, so they do count in the standings, but will teams rest their guys? Will the league pressure teams potentially behind the scenes to play their guys in these games? They are scheduled ahead of time, but there's a little bit of flexibility with the schedule now because there kind of has to be because of the knockout round. So it's going to be interesting to see how they kind of manage all of this on the schedule side. If you're a basketball nerd like I am, I'm intrigued by it all. I'm not all in, that's for sure, but I'm also not all out. I have to remember which games, by the way, are happening in November, have impact on the in-season tournament, which is going to be interesting for the first time to kind of have that dual following throughout the season. But they all do count in the standings, and there's already odds flying around at this point in time, which I think is funny. I know FanDuel has odds if you are interested in that. Our friends over there about the MVP of the in-season tournament, also who might win it. It's tough to gauge that right now, but as far as the group is concerned, it's not like a murderer's row for the Hawks. Philly and Cleveland are good teams, but they're not going to just overwhelm you. Indiana is interesting, and Detroit is up and coming, but certainly winnable for the Hawks. I would imagine the Hawks will not be picked to win that group by many people. They certainly could, and I think that the Hawks push and catch fire at the right time in November. They could be certainly a threat to make a run into that. And I'll actually be interested to see. I actually want to hear from people. If you have thoughts on in-season tournament, I'd be interested in hearing them on Twitter. Do you care about this? Just because, we're going to talk about the games either way on this podcast because they're going to be games that count. But I wonder if there's anything that should be more expanded, if you want to hear more focus on that, et cetera. But so let us know in the comments and all that stuff, as well as on Twitter at Locked On Hawks on the Twitter machine. All right, we have more to come on Pascal Siakam, so we will dive into that right now. Pascal Siakam is a big topic in NBA circles right now. A lot of the offseason is basically over in the league. Obviously, James Harden is still out there. Damian Lillard is still out there as I'm recording this podcast as trade targets. But free agency is not all the way over, but certainly most of the way over. We talked about Siakam a couple times already on this podcast the last couple weeks, including earlier last week. I encourage you to listen to those podcast discussions for even more on this topic if you want to listen to more of it. But there was some new reporting and a bunch of new questions that I got from fans on Monday. So I figured it's time for another check-in on Pascal. Mark Stein wrote about Siakam in his Substack this week, which I think got some attention. It's not probably the only reason why this happened, but at the same time, it's going to be interesting to see what kind of this intel leads to. So first, he said it is, quote, increasingly conceivable, end quote, that Siakam could be moved and that the chatter is, quote, bubbling at an increased rate, end quote. That is not just with regard to the Hawks. Keep that in mind. I think Hawks fans are understandably viewing this through a Hawks-only lens, but Siakam is available in trade to more than just the Hawks. In fact, Mark Stein mentioned the Pacers as a legitimate trade contender for him in the near future, potentially, and also said that it is, quote, believed that there are other suitors whose identities have yet to be confirmed, end quote. So Pacers in the mix, Hawks in the mix. Also, Stein said because the Hawks have been unable to complete a deal despite recent efforts, the door is not open for other teams. So it's not like going to just be the Hawks. I did talk about this last week, but Stein and Chris Haynes both have indicated in various ways that the buzz is that Siakam does not really want to stay in Atlanta. And that I think they've tried to make that clear that no extension is going to be coming if that happens. Obviously, could be some posturing there. If you make the trade, that doesn't mean he won't sign an extension, but certainly there's I trust Mark Stein's reporting that there's been some buzz on that. So we'll see. That's an important detail. And I think one the Hawks have to be pretty confident in and nail down before you pay top dollar for Siakam. Certainly, there is a bargain basement price that you might just do the trade, even if there's no future in it, at least guaranteed future in it. But that price is lower than it would be if you had some confidence that you could keep him long term. So Stein also bookended his column by saying, quote, "The Raptors are indeed far more prepared to surrender Siakam than initially realized," end quote. So that's all that for now. That's kind of the mainstream reporting. I know there was like some stuff on Twitter about, insiders or whatever, but that's what Mark Stein's reported, and we'll go off that for right now. Questions to answer before we get out of here about this. One comes from Tim, who says, "What do you make of the Siakam rumors today? How serious is it?" I'll say this. It's hard to pin down what people are actually really meaning by the rumors here. Again, the only actual reporting on the record is Mark Stein's that was new on Monday. I know there are things bouncing on Twitter and like not mainstream stuff. What I would personally say and be confident in at this point in time is that the Siakam stuff never really died on the Hawks side. There were some assumptions made that it was like maybe going to go off the table once Murray was signed. I think that's understandable, but I did say on that podcast after Murray extended, like Siakam's not off the table. It may be more unlikely, and that could be true, but it was never off the table. And they're still interested in Pascal Siakam, from what I understand. That's still the case now. So with Stein's reporting about Toronto simply opening up things for more bidding, it doesn't seem like it's Hawks for bust. That's kind of important to point out. So as far as how serious is it, I think it's serious in that the Hawks do want him. I don't think it's like imminent. Maybe I'm going to be wrong about that. Things can change in a blink of an eye, especially with the entire league in Las Vegas right now. A lot of conversations happening on an hourly basis. But the last that I checked in, which was this morning, it didn't seem like it was like going to happen any minute. But we'll see. It certainly could happen. If that happens, I will respond in emergency podcast form, as you might imagine. Last thing on today's podcast. Question from Greg, who says, "What would the Siakam deal even look like now that Murray cannot be traded?" So again, Murray can't be traded for 6 months. Keep that in mind. So that's off the table until at least January. I think I said this on the podcast once already, and I definitely tweeted it, but it's almost certainly going to have to be built around DeAndre Hunter if the Hawks were to get Pascal Siakam. I thought Hunter was going to be basically a near lock to be in the trade even before Murray was extended. It could have been Murray plus Hunter, but Hunter was always going to be in it, I think. Even more so now, though, without Murray. Part of that is the player that he is, the position that he is, and a lot of it is contractual. So Siakam makes about $37.8 million this year. The Hawks are well over the cap, so they have to match salary on the deal. Hunter is about $20 million this coming season. That would be, obviously more than half of the salary matching in the deal. Then from Hunter, you could go with Capella as the main matching salary alongside him, which gets you all the way to the number that you need, likely with a third team involved, or you're cobbling together other salary alongside Hunter. If you include Capella, Toronto doesn't really want Capella. They just got a 4-year, $80 million deal given to Jakob Poeltl. So I think you need a team to reroute Capella too. So keep that in mind. But if it's Hunter plus Capella, that's kind of all you need money-wise. If it's not Capella, the Hawks have other options, like they have Patty Mills now to aggregate in a trade. You have Saddiq Bey at about $4.5 million. You have Bruno Fernando if you want to throw him in there. You have Okongwu. You have they could do some stuff. I would not trade Okongwu, just for the record, but that's just another matching salary that you could use. Even AJ or Jalen if you want to do that. I wouldn't do that either. But I think Toronto's going to ask for some other stuff that has value, like picks or young guys. So it comes down to like pain tolerance. Like, are you willing to trade someone in the group of Bufkin, Griffin, Johnson? That would be interesting. I don't know how people feel about that, but that would be something that I'm sure that Toronto will probably ask for. Okongwu, I would not give up flatly, especially if it was Capella. You can't do both. But Bey is kind of in the middle of that. Like the Hawks have these 3 young, cheap guys, which I would describe again as AJ, Jalen, and Bufkin, the 3 most recent first-round picks. Then you have Okongwu, who's not super duper cheap anymore, but still is very, very valuable and very good. And then you have Bey is kind of in the middle, where like you traded for him. He's still making only $4.5 million this year, but he's not like a future star upside guy like AJ or Jalen is. So that's kind of interesting to see how they might go with that. Obviously, Patty Mills being not dead salary, but certainly just filler in that way could be pretty interesting. So I'll say this to answer the question about kind of what I think the deal what might look like if Murray, since Murray can't be traded. So I'm not reporting this. Very clearly, I am not reporting this at all. I'm answering the question. If I had to guess what a deal would look like, my best guess would be a 3-team deal that has Hunter, Capella, and another asset or 2, whether it's Bufkin, whether it's Bey, whether it's a first-round pick, something like that. something like that. That's all I'll say. I don't want to get too specific because I don't know, but that would be my guess. Would be the Hawks sending out Hunter, Capella, and something else, and getting Siakam. And again, in a 3-team deal, because Capella does not have the same value to Toronto that he has the other teams, because they already have Pirtle entrenched. So that's my best guess. There are other ways. Obviously, it could be Hunter, Mills, Bay, and something else that gives you enough money if you don't want to do Capella. But I do think, well, I'm not going to go down this rabbit hole a ton. I do think if you trade for Pascal Siakam alongside DeJounte Murray, I am one of the bigger Capella advocates out there. I don't think that Capella makes a ton of sense with that group because you just need more flexibility. Murray and Siakam are not good shooters. They're not terrible shooters, but they're not good shooters. So if you already have two guys who need the ball in their hands who are not plus floor spacers, having a total non-shooter at center as well is a challenge. It's not like impossible to work through when you have Trey and you have enough shooting at the other spot, that fifth spot, with regards to AJ or Bogey or whatever. But you're going to need some more flexibility. So I think I do understand keeping Capella. Like, I think Capella is really good. But while I've always kind of thought that it was probably the good time to go ahead and move Capella right now because Kong was ready to go, but that only heightens in my mind if they were to get Siakam and don't trade Capella. Like, that doesn't mean, like, I think for me, I'm not making it as clear as like yes or no for sure, but I would lean toward thinking it's a good idea to move Capella if you're trading for Siakam. Again, if you're trading for Siakam, because Siakam and the fit stuff there, it just makes more sense. And with a guy like a Kongwu who's more versatile, maybe even can shoot already, just more ball skills on the perimeter, more flexibility, etc. So we'll get into that more if we need to later on. But that's kind of all I wanted to answer on that particular question. And I appreciate all the folks reaching out during the day on Monday asking stuff about Siakam. If there's more that happens, we'll touch on it later on this week. I'll be breaking down the game. Of course, the Hawks play on Wednesday and Thursday afternoons back to back in Summer League. I will still be in Las Vegas for both those games, so stay tuned for all of that. If nothing happens as far as like a big impetus to record the podcast between now and Wednesday afternoon, I will not be doing a podcast between now and then, but please subscribe to the podcast and you will always find it, whether it be on YouTube or Spotify or Apple, all the way across the board there. Also, my written work is available, patreon.com/BT Rowland. Thank you for listening to the show, everybody. I really do appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your Tuesday into Wednesday, and the Hawks will be back in action on Wednesday afternoon, and we'll see you after that game. We'll see you, as always, next time.